So let me begin by commending our state legislators for their metro proposal. I think it makes a very positive contribution to our ongoing discussions of how we get metro back on track. So I think a number of the issues they've raised are important issues. Clearly, they understand we need dedicated funding, and their goal is to achieve more than just dedicated funding. It is to bring about reforms. And they've done it, I believe, in an open-handed manner. They haven't said, if you don't do this, we're done. They said, really, we want you all to consider these proposals. And I particularly think that the people we need to have consider these proposals are Virginia and former Secretary LaHood, as he does his work. And I think it was important for Maryland to speak out and to give its own views as to the kinds of things that need to be tackled. I've been among those that felt that governance issues were very important issues. I've been among those that did not feel it was appropriate to have elected officials serve on the board, in part because I felt that elected officials, by definition, tend to have shorter time horizons, and that works against the system when we have longer-term needs that need to be addressed. So I feel like they've put out a particular proposal. I would say to you that I think it's harder for Northern Virginia in many ways, because Northern Virginia jurisdictions are the ones that pay for Metro, unlike in Maryland today, where the state pays for Maryland. So if I am ponying up the dollars in Arlington, if I'm ponying up the dollars in Fairfax, I can certainly understand why they say, I need to be there. These are my taxpayer dollars. I need to be there to make sure that they are being spent wisely. To me, that begs the question of whether or not we need elected officials to serve in that capacity. This is an organization that requires a great deal of sophistication, and therefore you could imagine financial advisors, you could imagine transit experts, you could imagine a whole array of people that could serve in that capacity. But it is an important conversation. I also think it's important that we consider these things, if you will, in parallel tracks, which is that it'd be nice to see them conjoined in a way in which the dedicated funding and reforms go hand in hand. But I have become skeptical that we can open the compact successfully and have Congress act on it. So my hope is that we can arrive at a consensus that says we absolutely must have dedicated funding, and to the extent to which we can achieve these other objectives, we will do so. So I think that that's an important aspect of this. I also love their effort to make sure that riders are actually a bigger part of the experience, and that we make sure that our metro riders are heard, we make sure that our our bus riders are heard, and that our paratransit riders are all heard, and in a meaningful way. I don't believe that organization has been a meaningful part of the metro system or the WMATA system to the extent possible. I think the strengthening of the Metro Inspector General is a positive initiative, and obviously the transparency really goes back to something that I've been fighting for some time, which is benchmarks, and being transparent with respect to the benchmarks, the metrics, making sure that the system is operating exactly as it should. So I think that this is a very positive contribution to the dialogue at an appropriate point in time. We need to be aligned as of, if you will, January 1, if not before, so that when the Virginia legislature convenes, we are real clear as to what we can do and what we must do. So this has been a positive contribution, in my judgment, to that effort. Tomorrow we will have a panel on the innovation economy in Montgomery County. I've been pushing for some time to see if we can't bring about a more innovative economy in Montgomery County. I helped create the Office of Innovation, which we just had Mr. Hoffman leave. But that too was designed to see in every way in which we could reposition Montgomery County as more innovative in the world at large, and particularly in the business community. So it is a panel that's designed to share with us what is it that drew them to Montgomery County, what do they think is necessary to create an ecosystem of innovation in Montgomery County. So we'll have people like Tim Chi of Wedding Wire, and if you've ever been to Wedding Wire, you will experience firsthand the positive energy, the innovation, just the, oh my goodness, we want more of these kinds of companies in Montgomery County. And they're one of our biggest employers, one of our most successful companies right there in Friendship Heights. And it pops. Every day, these young people are working, and it's everything you want. So again, the conversation more broadly is what do we learn from this? How can we promote this so that it becomes a greater part of our economy? Third item for this morning, Apex Building sidewalk closure. As most of you know, when I first joined the council, this issue came up as to how is it that when builders in Bethesda are constructing that we need to take away sidewalks. We're all sophisticated people. We've traveled around the world. We've gone to New York City. Imagine what happens if you were to take away a sidewalk in New York City every time there was construction. It doesn't happen. You have canopies. Okay? You have ways in which you can protect pedestrians and at the same time allow for this construction work to go on. This was obviously, because it's on 355, done by SHA. So today, Mr. Corman and I have sent a letter to SHA that I'll share with you that asks them to revisit this issue and really to explain how it is that they do this analysis, because it's not transparent. It's not transparent what the criteria is, and it ought to be, because this is way too important. It creates an unsafe environment for our pedestrians. I have an email that actually triggered this because I hadn't known of it until we got the email. It is so important that we hear from our folks, so we'll be sharing that as well, of a constituent who said, did you know what just happened here? We just closed this down. Our county, as a result of the legislation that we've passed, really works hard to make sure this doesn't happen, and makes the developer come in and show that they had explored all sorts of options and that this was really the only option. I'm not convinced that that was done here at the state level, and I feel like we really need to tighten this up. Obviously, we want the Apex to move forward. That's not at issue here. It is, how do you do it? And in urban environments, people have learned long ago how to do this work without taking over the public domain. So that's item 3. What do we have for item 4? Item 4, landlord-tenant bills up for final reading tomorrow. This was an effort from Mr. Hucker, Mr. Elrich, and I to increase advocacy on behalf of tenants. We had heard it for some period of time that it's just very difficult for many in our community to raise their hand and feel like they will get a fair shake when they go to landlord-tenant commission. So this is an effort to enhance advocacy on their behalf, and I'm hopeful that this will pass tomorrow. Last week, I think we made a significant step forward in terms of our BRT proposals, that we approved the Veers Mill BRT. It was probably, I think, the oldest of the BRT routes that had been under study for some period of time, and we picked a route that an approach that actually harmonized what was necessary to provide a high-quality service and saved our taxpayers, a considerable amount of money. We did not need dedicated lanes on Veers Mill. The time savings achieved as a result of dedicated lanes on Veers Mill was infinitesimal. And so we were able to come up with, and our staff really, Dr. Orland did an excellent job in coming up with a hybrid approach that the state embraced. And that's what we passed last week unanimously. We had Purple Line. Honest to goodness, this judge is really pushing me to hold to my line that I will try to be respectful of all federal judges, even when I disagree with them. But this is really, it's pushing the limit. It's pushing the limit because this judge is making it clear every time he speaks that he really is substituting his judgment for that of the agencies that are responsible for determining this project. It is not for him to say whether or not we could do this less expensively with a different approach. That is what we have federal agencies to determine. And our federal agency determined that this was, in fact, the best approach. We had looked at BRT on this system. It did not have the capacity to handle what needs to be handled. And so it is just so inappropriate for a federal judge to fundamentally question the wisdom of a project. That is not his role. And he is abusing his role because of his basically seeking to substitute his judgment. His role is a very limited role of finding whether or not this decision-making process, as we've talked about before, was arbitrary and capricious. That's it. And it clearly, the judgment of the federal government was not arbitrary and capricious, and it was not arbitrary and capricious to not review the testimony of those who opposed this project, because the federal government did come forward and literally show them that actually if they had no ridership from Metro, this would still be an effective project. And as we've also discussed, the notion that we're not going to fix Metro, this is a 40-year time projection, or to 2040, really, that we're not going to have fixed Metro by then. It's just preposterous. So I do find it very unsettling when a federal judge abuses his role in this process. We have a public hearing tomorrow night on Rock Spring. Rock Spring is one of those situations where all of you know that old office parks are struggling. And so we have to collectively get our minds around what do we do in response to that. So that's where Marriott is leaving. And they're leaving because it doesn't have what people are looking for these days. So what do we do? That's what this master plan hopefully will allow us to begin having a good conversation with respect to. Today in the Fed committee, we're taking up the Fed committee's taking up the Bethesda overlay zone. We had a lot of testimony with respect to that. I will be working with staff on a particular amendment to ensure that the work we did in protecting residential communities is not undermined by, quote, bonus density. That when we set the heights for the east side of Wisconsin Avenue that is immediately adjoining to our residential communities, that we meant it, and that it wasn't going to be something that people could then get greater heights for. On the other hand, I don't have those same qualms in the middle of Bethesda, and we can have those kinds of conversations if that's what's necessary above 15%. But from my perspective, when we set those heights, and I worked really hard to set heights that I thought were appropriate for those communities, that we don't undermine that by additional bonus density for MPDUs or anything else. Why don't I stop there and turn it over to you guys?
Roger, do you think the state should have not signed that contract with Purple Line Transit Partners while this lawsuit was pending? Because the judge brought that up a lot on Thursday, that this is the state's fault for signing that contract. They're in the situation that they're in because they signed it while this lawsuit was pending.
So we're in the situation we're in because a federal judge ruled erroneously. And will be reversed.
Is the BRT for Viewers Mill, is that a BRT? If it's going to be operating in mixed traffic, is it fair to call it a BRT? It's just, how's it different from Ride-On?
Because it will have all the aspects. First of all, we will improve the intersections, I believe 12 intersections. We will ensure that the BRT actually moves ahead of traffic. And that's what gives it the equivalence of dedicated lanes. So it has the same efficiency as though it were dedicated lanes. It will be a BRT bus. You will have off-fare boarding, whatever it is. I apologize. I always get that phrase wrong. So that you'll have all the other aspects of BRT, including the BRT vehicle, and the same efficiency. So there is often conversation, for example, on 29, was that going to be real BRT because that's sitting in mixed traffic? But in this instance, I actually feel more confident since it has all the efficiencies that you would have achieved with dedicated lanes. So the plan at the moment is this will be a, quote, flash vehicle.
But it seems like, I mean, is it different than ride-on? Ride-on can use those same, type of lanes if you're improving.
Again, the vehicle itself will be different. Getting on the system will be different. So it have every other aspect of BRT except dedicated lanes where you don't need them. So why would you spend the money for dedicated lanes if it doesn't actually create an added time factor?
Is there an added time factor for purchasing new buses that, have the level?
Yes. Yes. We're happy to get you to DOT so that you can see those factors, but absolutely.
Has CAR informed the county when they're going to start demolishing this Apex building?
May have.
Okay.
It's not something that comes to my mind. I know that they've closed the lane,
Yeah.
so it appears to be, hopefully it would be imminent.
Over the weekend, Montgomery County Police arrested 3 individuals for double murder. Does the county have a problem with crime?
I don't believe so.
Why not?
I think the statistics demonstrate that we don't have a problem with crime. Do we have terrible acts? Absolutely, as every community does. But do we have a, quote, problem with crime more generically? I would suggest that if we look at the statistics, that that's not the case. We are a safe community.
On Friday, I toured the DLC with Comptroller Francho, who, as you know, is a pretty big critic, or possibly the biggest critic of the DLC. And he said afterwards that he sees improvements there, that he likes what they've been doing, but his mindset on it has not philosophically changed. He's still against the DLC existing. Where are you at on the DLC, and how do you think the county should handle its future?
Well, I guess I would say that, like Comptroller Francho, my fundamental view has not changed either. That I don't believe that this is a business that we do well or a business that we should be in. And I think it's a business that costs our county money. It's a business that inhibits restaurants from coming to Montgomery County. All you have to do is talk to any restaurant owner and ask them what it's like and whether or not they would voluntarily enter into a dynamic in which so much a part of their profit margin is related to alcohol and wine, and ask them as to whether or not they're comfortable dealing with a DLC, unlike any other place in the United States of America. Okay? So it's clearly about the dollars. And then the question is, could we develop a transition and a shared savings arrangement with the state going forward so that you don't do this all at once, but that you create a context in which you allow the state would in fact benefit, as you know, from the elimination of DLC because they're the ones that collect taxes. So if we got some of those dollars back and had a transition to getting DLC out of its monopoly position in the county, I continue to believe that that would be advisable. And I would say that this guy is, he's doing a decent job. Okay.
The new director.
Yeah, I have met with him several times, and I believe that he is making the best of a situation that I consider to be untenable.
Where's Montgomery County at with this regional sales tax proposal for Metro?
So the regional sales tax notion was that there would be 1 cent that everybody would pay, regardless of how much your system either depends on or contributes to Metro. Well, in that context, Virginia would have been paying something, and forgive me, I forget the number, but over 50% of the dollars would have been coming from Virginia, whereas their pro rata share of the system is something on the order of 36%. So I have great empathy for Virginia in this conversation, saying, really, because of the beauty, it's a regional sales tax, that means that Virginia should pay a disproportionate amount? If that were on Montgomery County, I'd be screaming, saying, that's not fair. So I think that the dollars need to be allocated equitably. And the best way we have in this moment is WMATA's allocation today, that formula today. Now, if that formula needs to change, and it does change over time depending on when stations are opened, then that's understandable. I know that Phil Mendelson believes that the District of Columbia is not dealt with fairly when it comes to the formula. Well, that can be a separate conversation. You fix the formula, or if there can be agreement with respect to fixing the formula. But this doesn't feel right to me. It doesn't feel fair. And that's separate and apart from that our greatest hurdle is going to be winning in Virginia. So the notion that you would lead with a proposal that is unfair to Virginia doesn't make sense to me. So I get the elegance of a 1 cent sales tax, but the reality is Virginia should figure out what it wants to do. D.C. should figure out what it wants to do. And as Mr. Corman and others said, Maryland should figure out what's right for it. It could very well be that what's right for Montgomery County and Prince George's County, if their preferred approach, which is take it out of the trust fund, okay? If that doesn't work, then they are advocating that Prince George's County and Montgomery County move forward with an approach that works for us. So we'll figure that out.
And so currently, Maryland's funding comes from that transportation trust fund? Or?
Yes.
And if Montgomery County and PG, that would have to be a new sales tax that would go to funding Metro. So it would go from a statewide priority to a statewide funding mechanism to
A statewide, so it would have to be understood that the state would not be offloading its responsibility.
Is there a concern there that
No.
if you do raise this 1 cent sales tax in MoCo and PG, that the state would try to decline its financial responsibility to pay for Metro?
I think the understanding, even with the governor and his people, is that they will not shirk on what is theirs to do. And the governor had made it clear from the very beginning that he was not going to raise taxes for this increment of help that WMATA needs, and that would fall on Montgomery County and Prince George's County. And as long as everybody plays fair, I think that that's understood.
But right now, the priority for Montgomery County would see increased funding from the Transportation Trust Fund rather than have to level this 1%.
Sure, I mean, why wouldn't you? Okay? But what that does, of course, is everybody recognizes is put roads projects around the state in competition with this additional Metro funding requirement. Now, I know other places have increased gasoline taxes and things of that nature, particularly when gasoline taxes have fallen to the point where they have. That's made the trust fund even on shakier footing, which is, again, goes back to the Purple Line decision to stop moving forward with the Purple Line, is that there was too big a draw on the Transportation Trust Fund at a time when revenues were falling. So all of those things combined lead me to believe that ultimately Prince George's County and Montgomery County are going to have to step up and do what we need to do, because it is so vital to our quality of life, our economy, and our environment. All right?
A blogger today suggested that a council employee cannot also serve the council if they run for office. I'm curious if you had any thoughts about any staff changes.
I have no comment. Okay. Thank you, guys.